Hi quilters! Today's video is a tutorial for the Nantucket Mini-CHARM bag. There are 3 different versions and they all have a finished size of 7.5 inches wide, 6 inches tall, and 2 3/4 inches deep. To make the scrappy version, you need 1 mini charm pack, a zipper, a piece of fabric that measures 12 inches by 18 inches, 2 rectangles that are 2.5 inches by 3 inches, and a piece of fusible grid that is 5 blocks wide and 8 blocks long. It's a 2.5 inch fusible grid. For the blue and green version, you need part of a mini charm pack, a zipper, 2 rectangles measuring 2.5 inches by 17 inches, a lining measuring 12 inches by 18 inches, fusible grid cut 3 squares by 8 squares, and 2 rectangles 2.5 inches by 3 inches. For the navy and white version, you need the rest of the mini charm pack left over from the blue and green version, a rectangle that measures 4.5 inches by 17 inches, a rectangle that measures 2.5 inches by 17 inches, 2 rectangles measuring 2.5 inches by 3 inches, 1 zipper, a lining rectangle measuring 12 inches by 18 inches, and some fusible grid that is 2 squares by 8 squares. For each of the versions, you will also need a piece of soft and stable that measures 12 inches by 18 inches. The first thing to do for each version is to fuse the mini charm squares to the fusible grid. Make sure you're fusing to the bumpy side. My ironing board cover is made out of denim, so it's hard for me to see the lines that are on the other side of the grid. So what I've learned to do is to put a white piece of paper on top of my ironing board, but underneath the grid so that I can see all of the lines. I usually double check that I have the bumpy side up, and then I put my squares where I want to put them. Make sure the squares are right side up. Arrange your squares any way you want, and then you're going to press them into place. The nice thing about arranging them all first is that if you get halfway through and you decide you want to move things around, you can still do that as long as you haven't pressed them into place. I was just trying to spread out the colors and make sure that I didn't have 2 pieces that were exactly the same right next to each other. Once it looks good, press the squares onto the fusible grid. I have my iron set on the cotton setting, and I'm counting to between 5 and 7 before I move on to the next little spot I want to press. Once all the squares are pressed, lift to make sure that they are all stuck to the grid. I'm working on all 3 versions, so I'm going to add the squares to the 3x8 grid and the 2x8 grid before I head over to the sewing machine. If you're enjoying our video, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe to see more videos from the Quilted Forest. I made a practice bag with solid bright squares before I started these samples. I'll show it to you at the end of the video. Now that all the squares are pressed onto the grid, it's time to go to the sewing machine and get the seams sewn. The beauty of using the grid method is that instead of picking up each of these squares separately and sewing together one at a time, all these little seams, you just fold over the whole row and sew all those seams at once. You will sew all the seams going one direction first using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. On this section, instead of sewing 39 different seams, I will only have to sew 11 seams. And I don't have to worry about if I'm sewing it to the wrong piece because all the pieces are in place and I don't have to move them around or try to keep track of them. Just keep folding over the next row and sewing the 1/4 inch seams until you have all the long seams sewn. Once all the long seams are sewn, it's time to clip corners so that you can sew the seams going the other direction. Clip through the stitching line. You're clipping between the fabric, only cutting through the fusible and the stitching. If you do not clip the corners, when you turn the seam to go the other direction, your corners will be kind of lumpy. So the reason you want to clip the seam is that so you can get these seams to go opposite directions. I find it easiest to press after all the seams have sewn, so I don't take it to the ironing board yet. I make sure I clip all the corners and sew all the seams going the other direction. This makes it easy to flip those corners so that the seams go opposite directions all the way through. You definitely could press after each seam is sewn so that you can have a flat piece to work with. But I like to put the last seam sewn on top so I know which way to have the bottom seams go, and I just keep on sending them through the machine. Once all the seams are sewn, head to the ironing board to press. I like to press it from the grid side or the back side first, then flip it over and press it from the front. On the unit that is 2 by 8, piece the 4.5 inch by 17 inch rectangle on the one side and the 2.5 inch by 17 inch rectangle to the opposite side using your 1/4 inch seam allowances. Press towards the rectangles. You're going to layer this piece with your soft and stable and your lining just like you would layer a quilt top. I'm going to baste my lining to the soft and stable, and then I'm going to flip it so the lining is right side down, the soft and stable is on top, and then the piece section is going to be right side up on the top. On opposite sides of the 3 by 8 unit, Piece the 2.5-inch by 17-inch rectangles and press towards the rectangles. And then, just like the other one, after you're done pressing, layer it with your soft and stable and your lining. There's no extra pieces to sew onto the unit that has 5 by 8 squares, so all you need to do is layer it with your soft and stable and your lining. Now it's time to quilt as desired. I used my walking foot and just did some simple line quilting. I studied how the bags on the pattern were quilted, and I tried to do something similar to what was pictured. The pattern is called the Nantucket Mini-CHARM Bag and is located on the Moda website. We will leave a link in the description below so that you can find it and print your own at home. Now it's time to make the little pull tabs. Fold the 2.5-inch by 3-inch rectangles in half lengthwise with right sides out and press. Fold each of the long raw edges into the center and press again. Fold in half and press one more time. Make 2 of these tabs for each bag that you are making. Top stitch along the folded edges on both sides. Fold the tabs in half and stitch along the raw edges on the ends to keep the tabs from shifting when you're doing the finishing work. Trim the quilted pieces to 10.5 inches by 16.5 inches, or even with the raw edges. One of my pieces measured right on the 10.5 inches by 16.5 inches. The other 2 were off by just a little bit less than 1/4 inch, but I didn't let it bother me. I just kept trimming right next to the raw edge. On the lining side of the quilted panel, mark a square in each corner that measures 1.25 by 1.25. If you're watching closely, you'll see that I actually marked mine at 1.5 by 1.5 because I read the pattern wrong, but I like the way it turned out, so if you want yours to be a little bit shorter and a little bit wider, go with the 1.5. Otherwise, do 1.25 by 1.25 from each of the corners. Cut on those lines to remove those corner squares. Before we add the zipper, we're going to fold the bag in half with the lining facing out and press the bottom edge flat at this stage. That's going to help us in a later step when we're creating the bottom corners. Now it's time to add the zipper. With right sides together, pin the zipper in place and sew the zipper to the top of the short edge. Use the zipper foot and make sure that you move the needle so that you don't break it. I did a little back stitching at the beginning and the end of the seam when I was putting the zipper on. Fold the zipper and the seam under to finish the seam with some top stitching. Make sure to catch all of the layers. The zipper and the panel should both be right side up. Now we're going to fold the bag lining side out so that we can stitch the other side of the zipper to the opposite side of the panel. Again, the right sides are together and you're going to repeat the same steps you did on the other side. I like to pin my zipper together at this point to kind of help keep everything in place, everything together. As you're pinning it in place, make sure the zipper lines up on both sides of the bag. Sew the zipper in place. When you get about 2/3 of the way across, you're going to stop with your needle down in the fabric, and then you're going to reach inside the bag, open up the zipper, and then you can finish the seam without having to go over the little zipper bump. We're going to remove the pin, and then we're going to turn the bag right side out so we make sure that the zipper is in place correctly and do the top stitching on the other side. The next thing we need to do is to carefully stitch across the zipper and the zipper tape where it meets the raw edges of the quilted panel. This is going to create a zipper stop and secure the zipper. Create a zipper stop on both ends of the zipper and then trim off the excess zipper. When you're going over the zipper, you want to go nice and slow so that you don't break a needle. I'll go back and forth maybe 3 or 4 times just to make sure it's secure. Make sure to open the zipper all the way before sewing the other end. I'm going to add my pull tabs right now while it's still open like this and they're easy to see. I'm just going to sew it right on top of where I closed those zippers off. Go nice and slow for this part too, because again, the zipper is still underneath there and you don't want to break a needle. Put both of the pull tabs on. Make sure you're matching raw edges to raw edges. The tab should make a little loop. Open up the zipper all the way and turn the bag lining side out. Now where the fold is at the bottom, you're going to mark squares like we did at the beginning in the top corners at the bottom corner. So you should have squares cut out of each corner. We are nearly there. There's only 6 seams left to sew. So the first 2 seams we're going to do are the side edges. Make sure your zipper is open and sew the side edges. I actually did a straight stitch and a zigzag stitch on both sides so that would finish off a little bit nicer on the inside of the bag. Now it's time to sew the box corners. Start with the bottom corners. Fold the side seam down to meet the bottom fold, creating a flat seam with the side seam at the center. Pin to secure, and then stitch the opening closed with a 1/4 inch seam allowance and a zigzag stitch just to finish it off nicely. Be careful when you're sewing the top seams because they'll have a little extra bulk in there with the zipper and the tabs. You'll want to go a little slower so that you don't break needles. When you do the corner where the zipper is located, you may have to close the zipper a little bit so that you get it away from the edge so you don't have that extra bulk of the zipper. Once all 4 corners are sewn, you want to open the zipper all the way and turn the bag right side out. Get your hand in the bag and then you can push out those corners so that they're nice and crisp. You can grab onto the pull tab and close the zipper and your bag is done. I like using the soft and stable with this bag because it makes it kind of stand up all on its own. It's a really sturdy little bag. If you want to dress up your bag a little more, you could add a zipper pull, but I think they're cute just the way they are. Now that you know the technique on how to make the bag, I think it would be easy to scale up the size of the bag to make it a little bit bigger. These bags were really cute, made with the Nantucket summer fabric, but I wanted to see one that was a little bit more colorful, a little bit more on the wild side. I had some solid fabrics left over from another project, so I just cut some more of the 2.5 inch grid and put it together. I picked a fun fabric, black and white, for the inside of the bag to give the little lining a little bit of a punch, and then put a colorful zipper on it, and then picked some scraps out of my scrap bucket to make the pull tabs. It turned out so cute. I think this would be a perfect one for a kid. We hope you remember to hit that like button, to leave us a comment and tell us what you thought about our project. Share with your quilting friends so they can make cute bags too. And most importantly, subscribe so that you don't miss any of the fun stuff that we do here at the Quilted Forest. Thanks for watching and happy quilting!